It's easy to define the golden age of Final Fantasy. It starts with 4 and ends with 10. Final Fantasy, and frankly Squaresoft as a whole, were on fire throughout the SNES and PS1 eras and into the PS2 generation. This is when the series hit its stride and consistently delivered masterpieces, with relatable characters, powerful stories, unforgettable worlds, fun mechanics, and legendary music. Decades later, FF4, 6, 7, 9, and 10 are still widely regarded as all-time greats. Even FF5 and 8, which aren't as universally popular as their contemporaries, are at worst cult classics, notable for their experimental systems and weird narratives. But Final Fantasy X, the capstone of this golden age, came out over 20 years ago, and since then the series has struggled to reach the same greatness that it once achieved so regularly. As a first foray into the MMO space, Final Fantasy XI is an odd duck that many longtime fans have never touched. FF12 might be the most polarizing game in the franchise. Some love the politically charged story, while the Gambit system is a dream for those who like to micromanage every action. Others, myself included, find the combat to be too automated and the characters a bit flat. FF13 probably has the worst reputation of any game in the mainline series. While I think it's better than it typically gets credit for, if nothing else, it's worth playing just to hear Masashi Hamauzu's god-tier soundtrack. It does get more things wrong than right, especially when it comes to storytelling. Despite a rough launch, FF14 has grown into a juggernaut. It's the outlier and clearly the best game of this era. We'll talk more about it later. The most recent entry, FF15, is a beautiful mess. It has some major strengths, including a sublime soundtrack from genius composer Yoko Shimomura, strong villain, and beautifully depicted theme of brotherhood. Equally, it has some glaring flaws: a boring open world, tedious side quests, and uneven storytelling that fails to give proper focus to what should be important relationships. Now, I don't mean to trash any of these games. I have a lot of love in my heart for all of them. At the same time, though, it's clear that they're not at the level of the Golden Age classics that preceded them. For a while, it seemed like this might be what Final Fantasy had become. Good, but not great. After all, nothing can stay at the top forever, and other long-running icons like Mario, Zelda, and Resident Evil have had ups and downs too. But in recent years, Final Fantasy has been trending up, and there are currently 3 very good reasons to be excited about the present and future of the series. For years, I'd heard that Final Fantasy XIV had one of the best stories in games. Even so, I ignored it for a long time. I just wasn't interested in MMOs. I didn't understand how they worked, and other players running around while I'm trying to get caught up in a story seemed like a distraction. What convinced me to finally give it a chance was the news that Creative Business Unit 3, the studio behind FF14, was also working on FF16. I wasn't familiar with their work and wanted to give myself some context for 16. I don't know if you've heard, but FF14 has an extensive free trial that makes it really easy for doubters like me to jump in with no strings attached. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to like it. I just wanted to play for a bit so I could say I gave it a shot. But after a few hours, I wasn't ready to give up, so I kept going. And going. And going. 600 plus hours later, FF14 has become one of my favorites. I'm still surprised by how much I enjoy the combat. Although it starts off slow and simple, it becomes far more demanding over time. Trying to efficiently string together actions while also looking out for enemy attack tells and reacting appropriately is challenging, especially for a newcomer to the genre like me, but that makes it so rewarding to learn and improve. That said, there's no doubt that the story is the reason to play FF14. You'll join a secret society and go on a god-murdering tour of the world, while attempting to thwart 2 separate, conflicting groups of villains. And that's just A Realm Reborn, the first and weakest chapter of the narrative. Players new to FF14 are often encouraged to push through the opening slog to get to the first expansion, Heavensward. This is where the story picks up and never looks back. You'll go to war with dragons, overthrow an oppressive regime, banish a flood of light in order to bring back the night, and take a trip to the moon. While I do think the characterization is held back by the fact that you play as a silent avatar, rather than a scripted protagonist with a meaningful personality and backstory, I'm in the minority here, and many players count 14's cast amongst their most beloved. What's not up for debate is that FF14's story is the grandest in the series, and well worth experiencing, even if you don't think MMOs are your thing. My perspective on remakes is if you're going to do a new version of an all-time classic, like Final Fantasy VII, you need to change things up in order to make it interesting. Simply retreading old ground will never produce emotions as intense as those provoked by the original, but reimagining that story can breathe new life into it. Have you ever wished you could wipe your memory and play your favorite game for the first time again? That's what FF7 Remake feels like to me. It's familiar in so many ways. The world design, art direction, and music. The themes of life, loss, and identity. And above all, the characters, who are just as I remember them from my childhood. Yet it's also capable of surprising me, of creating tension where before there was none, of shining a new light on those old themes and characters. There's nothing wrong with a straightforward remake that merely modernizes graphics and systems, but what Square is doing with Remake is bolder, more ambitious, and absolutely captivating. Remixing the most iconic Final Fantasy is a big risk that might blow up in their face, but I'm always happy to see creators pursue their artistic vision rather than going for an easy win. As far as I'm concerned, they've already nailed the most important piece of the puzzle: the characters. While Remake has a weird ending that threw a lot of players, including myself, for a loop, it works because the game goes to such great lengths to build a rock-solid foundation of convincing characters and relationships. Whether it's an uncomfortable conversation about the past with Tifa in her apartment, Cloud forcing himself to open up to the irrepressibly charismatic Aerith, or the kindness in Barrett's eyes and the warmth in his smile when he sees his daughter. This is an intimate story that highlights the humanity of its larger-than-life cast. And though there's no shortage of epic action and drama, the most memorable moments are these quiet heart-to-hearts between Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, and Aerith. The result is that we know who these people are, what they're fighting for, what they've overcome, what they're afraid of, and what they mean to each other. It's only once all of this has been established that the game truly lets loose its high-concept plot stuff that's largely bubbling under the surface prior to the final hours. If you want to make people care about a story, first make them care about the characters. Remake does this beautifully. Square is doing excellent work with its ongoing games, but fans are hungry for new stories too. And as I mentioned before, FF16 is under development at CBU3, a team with a formidable track record. Specifically, the project is being led by some of the principal creative voices behind Heavensward. In my mind, still FF14's best expansion. Heavensward is about a 1,000-year-old war between man and dragon, revenge and the cycle of violence, and how difficult it is to establish even a tentative peace, much less a long-lasting one. It takes place in the isolated nation of Ishgard. The perspectives of the commoners, nobles, and religious zealots who live there give us a three-dimensional view of the war. FF16 looks to be playing with a lot of the same ideas. Revenge, large-scale war, conflict between social divisions. Rather than confining itself to a single city-state though, FF16 features a world, Valisthea, comprised of 6 nations. If it's able to depict these places with anything approaching the nuance with which Heavensward presents Ishgard, we're in for something special. Setting foot into a new world is always exciting, and Valisthea looks set to be particularly rich, with magic, history, culture, and conflict. On top of that, we've been promised an adrenaline-pumping roller coaster ride. It's awesome to see how integral summons are to both the plot and the gameplay. The scale of the action is far more epic than anything we've seen before, and combat looks really slick. I know there are many fans out there who miss traditional turn-based battles, but I'm all in on Final Fantasy embracing the action RPG genre. 7 Remake's hybrid battle system is my favorite in the series, and FF16 might just give it a run for its money. We won't know for sure until we have the game in our hands. But based on what we've seen, there's every reason to be confident that this can be the best mainline Final Fantasy in decades. Over the past 35 years, Final Fantasy has amassed a legion of fans from across the world, all of whom have their own personal stories about how they fell in love with the series and what they want from it. The reality is that no single game can give every fan everything they want. But Square has built a healthy ecosystem where there's something for just about everyone. Whether it's the wildly successful MMO, the weird and ambitious retelling of a beloved classic, or the new entry that will pave the way for the future, we haven't had this many reasons to be excited since the Golden Age. If we're not already in the midst of it, we are certainly on the cusp of what I'm calling the Final Fantasy Renaissance. It's a good time to be a Final Fantasy fan.